Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number 7802-651. The 7800 series from Bommer is their line of double-acting floor pivots, spring-loaded floor pivots that you're going to see very commonly installed in doors in residential applications between a dining room and a kitchen. Very commonly seen there. Some standard duty commercial applications, you'll even see them. A variety of different applications that require the double acting and self-centering and closing operation of a door. The 7802 is a specific variant of that double acting spring-loaded floor pivot assembly. The 7802 specifically means that it is a lightweight. They're of the three light, medium, and heavy duty ratings. This is the low end in terms of the door weight of what it's intended for. Low end, not in terms of light duty as a negative connotation, but just specifically rated for a door that's about 35 pounds. If you had a door that was 35 pounds, you wouldn't select the medium duty because the spring tension would be too stiff. The door would not operate properly. So the 7802 will give you a spring tension intended for a door of that size, specifically non-adjustable. There's no adjustment on the spring tension here, whereas other models from Bommer, their 7801, will give you the ability to set the tension. This is for a 35-pound door and up to 3 foot wide, and as it being a standard duty or a lighter weight of their three models, I can kind of turn that, whereas with a heavier spring you can't do that, and as a result you can see what the operation looks like. This portion here features, because this is a hold open model, there's like a bird's mouth, and this hub here will knock into the bird's mouth, allowing it to hold open at approximately 85 degrees, which is part of it being a 7802. The duty rating, the hold open at 85 degrees, the non-adjustable spring tension is added to the fact that this 7802 is a model that features a jam bracket. So all of that conspires to mean 7802. The jam bracket installation, which we're going to talk more about in a moment, this gets screwed down to that, and then this gets attached to the wood frame or whatever the frame would be made of. That would be for an installation where you are not in a position or the ability to drill into the floor for whatever the reason might be. You're not, you might have a concrete floor and you're not going to drill into it, but you've got a wood frame and you will drill into that. So that would be a scenario. The 651 in the part number, that means two things, actually. That means that it is a nice polished chrome. That also means that the base material is steel, okay, which is very typical and common. This is what the face plate looks like, and of course there are two on this sort of model. Okay. Now, let's take a tour of the balance of the material. Of course, here's the business end. The floor pivot, the non-adjustable spring, as we talked about earlier, the finished base plate, floor plate for this pivot. It looks all but identical to all the other models in terms of the outside housing association. That's all the same, but this model specifically is what we had just discussed earlier. So, you will, of course, get the two finished plates. They're identical. Okay, so they're just literally going to be mounted, okay, on the door. Again, polished chrome finish. Then the jam bracket, that's also going to be in that same sort of polished chrome finish. Moving our way up the door really just brings us to the top pivot. You're going to have your door portion and your frame portion. And really, the last thing is just going to be all of the fasteners that you will need for attaching the top pivot to the header to the top of the door, attaching, of course, the body to the bottom of the door, the plate down to the jam bracket to the jam. All the finished screws that you will need for attaching the cover plates to the face of the door, those are included as well. Okay. There are 2 links below this video. One is a cut sheet, and the other are installation instructions. So to this point in the video, we've discussed where this is used, what type of door it's used for, what the part number means. The balance of this video is going to be talking about installing the material. So of the 2 documents that are down below, both are important. I can't say that both are crucial to review, at least at this point, but let's take a look at what we call the cut sheet first. The cut sheet is really exclusively a dimensional drawing of not only the installation of the material itself in terms of a preparation, which is covered in the installation instructions, but it's also a dimensional drawing of all of the individual pieces and parts. So that being the case, I won't beleaguer taking measurements of all of the parts in this video because it's literally all drawn out there. That's important to know in the perspective of, probably pre-purchase sort of decision making. It's certainly very handy if you have a door that was installed in 1948 and it has a piece of this hardware. You can look at this dimensional drawing and determine how close it is to the original. It could be identical. And yes, Bommer has been making these for that long. The balance of the cut sheet shows dimensional properties in terms of what the prep is to look like on the door, and the frame for that matter, for the installation process. However, the installation instructions cover all of that detail. Not as with the same amount of dimensions. So if you're looking for more information rather than less, the cut sheet is really for you. But there's really nothing on the installation instructions that is absolutely crucial that we won't pick up on the cut sheet, that we won't pick up on the installation instructions. So let's move over to that document. So the installation instructions, which are, by the way, included with the hardware, but you should review them prior to purchase as well. Step 1, they want you to radius the edge of the door. That is a crucial step and is, I can't say absolutely required in terms of not being able to install the piece of hardware without a radius. But without a radius, you will end up needing to adjust your installation, meaning if the palm of my hand is to represent the cased opening frame, and then my square-ended fist will represent a square-ended door, it will kind of run the potential for not clearing the jamb without those outside corners being radiused over. So what they're looking for is a 1.5 radius on the edge of the door. A radius, think of the top row of tile in the bathroom. That top row is curved over. That's a bullnose. Well, if you do it on both sides of the door, that double bullnose is now a radius. So radiusing the edge of the door is crucial because the balance of the installation instructions and all of the dimensions are based on you accomplishing that. I have radiused over probably countless doors for me in terms of prepping them for this sort of hardware, whether it be a double-acting Bommer spring pivot or maybe a center hung pivot. And if you have the tools and the knowledge and know-how, it's certainly no problem. If you're doing a one-time installation, you might want to have the door manufacturer prep the radius for you. But if you're going to give a go about it yourself and you're just curious to know how to go about doing it, the way that I have done it in the past is because of there being enough volume of knowing that you're going to be doing so many of these doors every so many weeks, I would have a router just dedicated to that purpose only, because the roundover bit that I would need to insert into it is so large. It's an 1.5 radius, it's a 3-inch diameter bit, that I would modify the base. I would literally cut the base of the horse and a half router, a good strong router, high horsepower, and get that inserted up in there, the router bit. Set the depth based on having an 1 3/4 door. Then at that point, because there will be a roller bearing on the end of that bit, obviously, You'll take your door and lay it down on sawhorses and certainly clamp it down. You don't want it to move at all, and the surface that it's clamped down to needs to be stable as well, because you've got a lot of horsepower, a lot of RPM, and a very large bit attached to this router. You'll get that clamped down and then put it, start on the right side of the door and make sure the base is flat on the door, absolutely flat, so that you are putting a true bullnose on that one face of the door. The depth is already set. And you're going to want to run that down the door. And you're going to want to be sure that when you get to the left side of the door that you exit straight off. Don't push this way. You don't want to round over the top or bottom of the door. Make one more pass and that's it. Don't make more than two. There's no reason to. That bit is so massive that's on there. That horsepower is so high that you will, in two passes, make the perfect sort of radius to that face of the door. But you want to just be sure that exit's straight off. Once you've got that and it all looks good, you might take a little bit of sandpaper to that just to clean it. Take the door and flip it over and do the same operation to the other side. Two passes and then your radius is done. If you can't do that, you're going to have to adjust. And we'll get to that later, but well, the truth of the matter is the adjustment that's required is there is what I call a heel plate, which is not directly referred to on the installation instructions, but this heel plate, which is going to dress off the end of the installation, forgive me, is based on that radius. So if you don't have a radius on the edge of the door, your heel plate's not going to fit very nicely. So you'll want to, give consideration to that radius. Step 2 is prepping the top of the door and moving to all of step 2 for your pivot. Now when I've installed these, I like to think that laziness is the mother of innovation or invention. So installing the top portion, I would seek the easiest way to do it. This is I believe a 1-inch diameter. I would have a Forstner bit. I would find my center line of these 3 1-inch holes, and I would just make my preparation like that and be done with it. Okay, those center lines are called out. The edge of the door to the center line of the pivot is specifically called out. Then your 5/8 on either side of that center line. Okay, the depth is called out as well. 5/32 of an inch. That's the header portion. That Forstner bit will give you a very clean cut, which is why I like to use it, because that header portion you'll see. And then, of course, your door portion, which you will not see, is the same physical dimensions. Okay. Step 2, the notes say prepare 1-inch diameter cut in the top of the door and the header. Install the top pivot into the header and mount the top pivot plate into the top of the door. Both the top pivot assembly and the spring pivot in the bottom of the door must be plumb and on the same center line. That is obviously going to be very crucial so that the door operates correctly. But all of that is based on the math of the installation instructions. All these dimensions are based on that center line being the same. Now moving to step 3. Step 3 is probably the most challenging aspect of this installation, but after you stare at it, like I recall very well the first time I did it, I says, well, gosh, that's an unusual cut to do, but when you come to the conclusion, all you need to do is notch the door so it looks like that, your installation's basically done. So that notch that you see, that's going to be 5/16 of an inch. Okay, it's going to give you the rest of the dimensions on how to go about doing this. So 5/16 over. Bottom of the door to the top of the cutout is 3 5/16. You're going to go an inch and 7/16 up to this area. You're going to take this 13/16 worth ear, and if you look at the diagram below, you have to mortise for this portion so that it's flush. 1 inch wide, 5/32 of an inch deep, and when this plate is flush with the bottom of the door, your installation is complete. The first time I did it, I may have used a jigsaw, which I don't like using jigsaws for any woodworking at all. A router is how I would always go about doing work like this. The problem being those radius corners that you have to physically finish with a chisel on those two inside corners that you see there. And then, of course, the bottom of the door, I'd usually just do that by hand. I don't make a living as a carpenter, as a woodworker. So, use your best judgment as to how I'll go about doing it. And I may have done it with a circular saw in the past as well, which is a terrible way to do that. The one item, getting to step 3, that makes me remember what is missing from the installation instructions, actually is a crucial piece of information, is knowing what's the net height of the door based on your finished opening. That information's not on the installation instructions, and quite frankly, really ought to be. And if it already is, and I'm missing it, on the cut sheet specifically shows a 9/16 of an inch undercut. Specifically also gives you an 1/8 of an inch gap at the top, so that if you've got an 84-inch inside, well, let's say an 80-inch finished opening height, your net door is going to be an 1/8 less than that, a 9/16 less than that. So you're going to be at 79 and 3/8. Does that make sense? 9/16 plus 2/16, 11/16. No, it doesn't make sense. You're going to be at 79 and 5/16 net door height. So that's really important to know. So that's a reason to have the cut sheet. The other thing that we should talk about before we get too much further is what your net width is going to be. So you can see from the diagram that you've got 3/8 of an inch on the pivot style. And that's partially because you're going to have this thick jam bracket that's going to be consuming some of the space. Now that 1.5 inch radius is going to allow you a very nice tight margin mathematically on paper. You can all but achieve an 1/8 of an inch margin on the other side, depending on the door thickness naturally. If you had a very odd thickness of door, technically your radius would need to change. But the understanding of what you're going to do on the opposite side of the door is something to consider. Will you radius that over so that you can have that equally tight margin? If you're not going to, you're probably going to have to maybe you'll allow 3/8 so that the margin is consistent on either side. You could certainly get away with a little tighter margin even if you have a square edge door, but the fact of the matter is that decision needs to be arrived at, what you're going to end up doing for that sort of installation. So I say it so that you can take that knowledge and determine what you're going to do before you get to that point. Radiusing a door, especially if it's a veneered door, can be a problem. You might have a 7-ply or a 5-ply or a 9-ply door, and if you are familiar with commercial grade flush architectural wood doors, you'll certainly understand what that means. But the point is, you've got these layers. It's like plywood. The thicknesses aren't equal, but it is in essence like plywood. And as you radius that over, what you end up doing is accentuating the visual aspect of those different layers. Here's a scenario. You've got a maple door. Turns out the crossbanding or the backer is some very dark finish of material. Could be an MDF sort of backer. That would incredibly deter the visual aesthetic of that door if you were to do that preparation to it. So you have to incorporate that into the understanding. Whether it be something, a very light sort of veneer like maple. Oak is not so obvious to tell, but then what's the style made of? Is it a softwood edge? Is it a matching edge? The grain will certainly change. You'll have layers that you'll expose, so you'll have to think all of that through. Any questions on any of that, just please feel free to reach out to us. I might come off as interested to talk about it, and that is actually my hope. Step 4 basically is saying get everything attached. Get the business end screwed to the bottom of the door. It's going to be obvious what screws you're going to use. Not really obvious. All of these screws have a chrome sort of finish to it. Okay. You've got some flathead zinc screws. Those would be for your top pivot. This attached to the bottom of the door. The plate is attached. The jam bracket is attached. Install the spring pivot onto the jam bracket using the 4 self-tapping machine screws, which are those small little round head machine screws. Get that attached. Step 5, insert the top pivot, the female portion onto the male portion that's in the header. Tip your door into place. At that point, what I do is, they say fasten your jam bracket securely to the jam. I, of course, mark my holes, remove the door, pre-drill. I don't want to split that frame. Then put it back in, install. Step 6, of course, and finally, is the installation of the side plates. Use top holes and plates only, is what Bommer says there. What they're saying is these top holes are going to be the only holes that you will use. The bottom holes that are drilled in the plate, there's nothing to attach them to because you've cut all that out from the door. Why Bommer doesn't make these plates is obvious without these holes, because then it becomes a handed plate, and then now all of a sudden they've got left and right. So when they're making them all the same, it doesn't matter what side of the door you use it on. I would prefer in a piece of finished hardware that holes aren't there, but it's not a concern. People, actually, I've never been called and said, hey, why are these holes there? It looks terrible. I've never had that phone call, actually, which I'm surprised. So that really concludes, after you get the finished plates, that concludes the installation. Before you get the plates installed, you're obviously going to test for operation. Any adjustments that you'll need to make, you'll need to make. You're going to want to, again, make sure that the vertical center line, the axis of pivoting, is plumb. That's obviously going to be crucial to proper door operation. And that 1948 reference that I made earlier is an actual scenario. The home that my great-grandparents built in just after World War II, or maybe during, I forget, has, I don't know if it still does, but had in the 1990s a Bommer, double acting, probably it was a 7801, it didn't have a jam bracket. Pivot that was heavily working decades later. Okay, so that is a very strong reason that I'm partial to Bommer. You can't see it very well, but right above their logo here it says Made in USA, and that's a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. If you have any questions on the Bommer 7802-651 or any 7800 series double acting pivot, spring pivot, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.